So, like the title of the video says, this will be covering Vauban's Photon Strike ability. Now, I know it's been a minute since I've done a video. I've really not been looking forward to this video. I have some problems with this skill. It's got some glaring weaknesses. Some of them I feel like are bugs. One in particular. Another one is its design. Um, and I'm not sure if they'll actually change that. So let's go ahead and jump into the skill. We're going to go through a lot here. I'm going to try to be quick and as succinct as possible, but there will be a lot, so buckle up. This is probably going to be a long video. So let's go ahead and look at the ability. By default, it uses 75 energy. It deals 2500 blast radius, and we'll talk about blast quite a bit. And it has a 5-meter radius, so it has roughly a 10-meter diameter, which is very small, in accordance with most skills anyway. So let's go ahead and actually see what this thing does. I'm going to make some chargers, and we're going to scale them to level 1. And we're going to go and hit them with a Photon Strike. So we're going to see 2500 damage. These guys have no sort of interaction with Blast. They're not resistant or weak to it at all. So that's very fine. This thing had the same exact treatment that Flechette Orb got. It now scales with enemy level. So every 10 levels past its first level, so 1, 11, 21, etc., it will get that 2500 damage again and again. So let's go ahead and hit them again. You should see 5k damage across the board. We got some 5ks. So what I'm going to do now is we're actually going to get into the first sort of, I think I'd classify it as a bug. So let's go ahead and get level 120s in here, and let's go ahead and hit these guys and see how much damage it does. So I'm going to throw it out here kind of as much as possible. Pay close attention to the numbers. And you see that 2500 damage? That is because the detection range, just like Flechette Orb, where it has like a detection range around the skill to catch enemy levels, it is not as big as the actual damage portion of the skill. So if you catch them on the outskirts of this skill, you will actually only deal 2500 damage. And it's kind of hard to show because the range is actually only about, I'd say about 1/4 of a meter to 1/2 meter. Let me try again. So that time I clipped the whole thing. And if you saw, that was 30k. But if we get just the outskirts, which we didn't do again, it's 30k. So just keep in mind, sometimes if they're on the outer ring of this ability, you will deal significantly less damage. I'll go ahead and try to get it one more time just so you know. You guys can see the bug. I assume it's a bug. 2500. Notice his health is maybe, I don't know, 1/5 gone, 1/6 gone. If I hit him right in the center, boom, they all get eviscerated. So in my mind, that has to be a bug. It's just straight up, it has to be. From what I can tell, this does still get affected when you put range mods on your setup. So you will still have a range, a slice around the outside of your damage, where you're dealing damage as if the enemy was level 1, as opposed to level 60 or 90 or whatever you're doing. So I apologize. I'm still stuffed up. I can't seem to shake it. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual ability itself. So this thing has blast damage type, as we see here. What does that mean? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring up a damage chart from the wiki. So right here we can see that blast is going to be effective versus fossil. So that's the kind of heavy beefeaters of the infested. It's weak against sinew. That's, I believe, just the Jordas Golem. It's like a specific boss. It's good against machinery, which those are like the crawlers for the corpus, like the little roly-polies. So that doesn't matter at all. And then we have -25 versus ferrite. So against ferrite type armor, it's bad, and against alloy, it does, you know, nothing. It's not plus or minus. So what I kind of want to get into here is some of its innate weakness against armor. So let's go ahead and just pull in, instead of those, I'm just going to pull in Lancers. So Corrupted Lancer, sure. So we'll pull in some Lancers, level 120s, and we're going to go and hit these guys with this ability and just see how much damage it does. So we throw it, it hits for 1800 damage. Notice that took about, I don't know, a seventh, an eighth of their health away. Now, this is a Bunker Buster Orbital Strike. It eludes me why this ability isn't able to just eviscerate these guys. I mean, I know why, because its damage is Blast, and Blast is not going to do anything against armor of this level. Now, if we lower these guys to, like, maybe, let's say 60, like, there's a lot of missions around, like, kind of the middling level. And if you throw them, it is going to deal a substantial amount of damage. Notice it still doesn't even kill them, but it will lower them significantly. So just keeping that in mind, if we threw some ability strength on here, we would be able to one-shot like level 60 trash mobs and stuff like that, even through armor. So that is a good thing. It's decent, but when we start getting into the higher levels, the skill is really going to fall off. And that's unfortunate because I think this is the one skill that shouldn't. It's a Bunker Buster. It's meant to penetrate all sorts of defenses. It's meant to literally, you know, come down from the sky and just demolish that point. Whatever is in that area, that space, is gone now. That's what I think of when I think of an orbital strike, you know, Buster Cannon, etc., etc. So it's really disappointing that this skill is only really good against unarmored enemies and against trash mobs. Now, Infested, it's a little bit better, but for the most part, it's still not going to be insanely good. If I, for instance, bring up Disruptors, and I'll just bring up one, that's fine. And we hit this guy. So he's weak to Blast, actually. So let's go ahead and hit him and see what happens. So it does 4,500 damage. It blows him like all the way across the world, but you saw how much damage or how much health he had left. So because he's a disruptor, he's actually going to be mitigating a giant portion of that damage. Let's see if we can't like not ragdoll him off this time. Let me try to blow him towards the center. Okay, so he's right there. So yeah, throw it again. 4,500 damage. Throw it again. 4,500 damage. So yeah, we can see that the disruptors are going to be pretty strong against this. If I do this exact same test against a healer instead, let me go ahead and bring one up. And let me hit this guy. We're going to see a lot more respectable number. Except I'm out of energy because I'm bad at making videos. So I apologize, guys. Give me a second. I probably should mod for efficiency, but I won't because, you know, I'm bad. So let's go ahead and do this, and we're going to see 45,000 damage and a lot bigger chunk of his health. So this is going to be effective against anything in Infested except Disruptors, and the Disruptor aura as well will kind of mess with us. Now for Corpus, because Corpus are kind of so weak, shields, who cares? It doesn't really matter too much. But if we're against nullifiers, let's go ahead and see what ends up happening. So, if we throw our orb, it bounces off and goes over there. One additional note. When a nullifier has his bubble, we do not get our damage scaling. So he's level 120. The thing actually does 2,500 damage. So just keep in mind nullifier bubbles are going to wreck this ability. Disruptors from Infested are going to wreck this ability. And in general, even if we take a look at the damage chart, Blast is not very effective versus, or not increasingly effective against anything really. It's just basically good against Fossil and meh at everything else. So it's not like we're getting any favors with the Corpus, right? The machinery, but we would one-shot those pretty much no matter what in any case. So finally, jumping back over to Grineer is where we're going to really see problems. If I drop in like, God forbid, heavy gunners, you know, and we throw this skill at them, it's going to deal like 500 damage or something. 500 damage, and we can see just the massive amount that was dealt to him. So now that we've kind of looked at the weakness to armor, I think it's probably important to understand why it's so very important to have a proper damage type on these abilities. So in my opinion, they should change Orbital Strike to deal radiation damage. And the reason I say this is because I think it should be an assassination tool, and it should deal as close to true damage as possible, though I think true damage is too much of a power creep. I think very, very, very few things should have true damage. So I think radiation damage would make a lot of sense here. Now, the way I kind of justify this is if we take a look at the damage types here. What are we really getting destroyed by? Well, on Infested, we're kind of destroying them anyway. They're very fragile for the most part. The fossil types, which fossil types are your disruptors, healers, toxic ancients, etc. We are dealing, you know, bonus damage to them, so that's all good and well. But we're already just so good at fighting the infested as Vauban. That's one of the things, one of the major problems I have with the design of this skill is A, the augment is designed very improperly, and we'll get to that in a bit. And B, the skill itself is balanced completely improperly. Vauban is already an incredibly good horde mode fighter. He can vortex things, he can bastille things. He has Tesla Bank now, and Flechette orbs scale really well. He's already just so good at control, point defense and stuff like that. He's so good at it already, and yet this is sort of supposed to be another skill that's kind of about that. It doesn't scale incredibly well into enemies that have tons of health or tons of armor, or have disruption or nullifier or anything like that. So all of our quote unquote priority targets, nullifiers, again, disruptors, things like that, they're not going to be destroyed by this ability. And I think that's a major problem. Like, I'm not saying it has to destroy all of them, because you would need probably true damage to do that. But at least some of them, like, it'll kill ancient healers and like toxic ancients, but like disruptors are major problems for ability builds, and this does nothing to solve that. Nullifiers are major problems just in general when you get to higher levels if you don't have a really fast firing weapon or a good way to deal with it. This ability does nothing to solve that either. You have Grenier, and that's just armor across the board. Just even like Lancers and stuff aren't going to be one shot by this ability at high levels, in arbitrations, endless modes, stuff like that. So what I think they should probably do is if they change it to radiation, you're actually going to see a giant bonus over here when it talks about alloy. And alloy, if we look at the alloy types, you have elite Lancers, eviscerators, bombards, and napalms. You know, like big boys. Like these are the heavies. These are like the heavy enemies. You won't get heavy gunners specifically, but for the most part, the rest of Ferrite is just your infantry, right? So yeah, you won't get heavy gunners, but you'll get the rest of them, and you'll get a 75% bonus versus them. And if we look at the other stuff radiation would do, we would be better at Sinew, which, you know, like we said before, I think that's just the Jordis Golem. That's just a very specific boss. Yeah, Infested Sinew. If we take a look at what was the other one? Radiation is good at robotic. Robotic is actually way more useful. All corpus proxies, Ambulus, Zanuka, stuff like that. It is way more beneficial than, you know, machines. Like, who needs help killing machines? To be honest with you, it's just a matter of having enough AOE to not have to aim at them, basically. And then you're going to be worse at fighting infested. And I actually would like that, because all of your other stuff is already so good at fighting infested. So what I'd like to do now, and I understand that you guys aren't coming here for my recommendations on how it should be, but you know, in testing, I like to look at these things. before we jump off of this page, I want to look at one final thing and just kind of talk about why damage types are so important. If we come down here, I believe we're getting close. Let me Google important. All right, right here. It's important to note that type modifiers against armor work in two ways. They mitigate a percentage of the target's armor and increase the damage dealt in the same way as the type modifier against hit points would do. So what does that mean? That means that if you have the proper damage type, you're actually straight up mitigating their armor, and then on top of that, you're getting a damage multiplier. So if we look down here, practically speaking, this means that corrosive damage is only reduced by 25% of a target's whole ferrite armor, and the base damage is increased by 75%. So if we come back up here and look at it, and we look at ferrite and corrosive right here, we see that 75% of armor is automatically ignored, and then on top of that, we deal 175% damage. So in so doing, we find that it's incredibly important for us to have the right damage types. The formula causes a massive difference between a medium and a large reduction. 75% reduction, 1/4 armor, is essentially twice more than a 50% reduction. What that means is, if we had radiation as our damage type, we would effectively ignore 75% of a bombard's armor, and then on top of that, do 75% extra damage. So we would be able to effectively deal with assassination targets for the Grineer. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily helps us with nullifier bubbles or with disruptors or anything like that. I don't think you can really get around those without either A, doing true damage, or B, having some special effect. Like, if Photon Strike hits a nullifier bubble, it nullifies the nullifier bubble. Or it stops aura effects from infested or something, which I don't think that's what it should do. That seems a little like too heavy-handed. You know, it's a little too on the nose. But I think changing it to radiation would at least make Vauban have a very good Grineer answer. And the trash mobs, because they're so much less tanky, may still be affected by Photon Strike pretty well. So now that I got all that out of the way, I'm sorry to do it like a science lesson, you know, to get all the math in here, but I think it's really important to know those damage types and why it's important. Now from here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a look at specific differences between two skills that scale. So we're going to do Flechette Orb versus Photon Strike, and I'd like to kind of demonstrate some of this stuff. So we have that. Let's go ahead and throw on some strength. I won't put on Blind Rage because it'll keep me out of there too long, but we can put on some other stuff. Let's put on efficiency stuff as well. So we have our Streamline, and we'll put on a Primed Flow as well, just so we don't have to like run back and forth all the time. And maybe even put in an Aura. Here we go. So, sorry that took a little bit of time to set up, but if we spawn some heavy gunners over here, what I'll do is I'm going to actually throw down another orbital strike, and we're just going to see how much damage it does. So 963. Now, this skill basically only scales off of ability strength. If I throw out my Flechette Orb, it actually is doing more than Photon Strike. Now, the question is, why? So, it's only doing it when it crits, but it can crit. So, Photon Strike can't crit, Flechette Orb can. Not only that, but it also scales off of Vigorous Swap. So, if I do this, whoops, it ended right when I started doing it. If I swap, now we're doing 3k damage. Now, if I throw a Photon Strike during this, still 963. So what we notice is that puncture damage, because it's more effective versus heavy gunners, we're going to get a lot more mileage out of a 25 energy skill than our 75 energy skill. And that's just really unfortunate. So the ways that they kind of fixed Flechette Orb, they gave it crit, they made it scale off Vigorous Swap. Basically, it's a bullet now. and it's a puncture damage type. So if we go back to the wiki one last time, and I apologize, but there's a very specific note that I want you guys to see. Where is it? Right here. Thus, having the damage type with the highest appropriate bonus is far more important against armored targets than unarmored targets. So what that means is if an enemy is armored, if you don't have the right damage type, radiation, puncture, whatever it is, you're getting wrecked. But if an enemy doesn't have armor, the damage type tends to not matter as much. So if we actually bring up some Corpus people, right? Let me just bring up some Corpus. I don't even know. Sure, we'll bring up some Corpus Wardens, right? So Corpus Wardens really don't have anything to do with Blast. Like, we don't see anything in their little card there. But if I throw in my Photon Strike, we're going to see a decent amount of damage. And their Proto Shields are, I think they're Proto Shields on Wardens, but their shields are not incredibly damaged by Blast, right? But again, just because they don't have armor, the damage reduction that they're getting is only like halving my damage, even if that, not even quite. Those are on health. So if I give them a second, hopefully they'll respawn their shields, and you're going to see way lower numbers than those 55s. Maybe one day. Maybe I should just respawn them. I'll go respawn them real quick. I apologize again. I know it's not super professional. I'm not good with like video editing and cutting, so I kind of just do these raw. But seeing their shields, if we throw, you're going to see a lot smaller number on the shields themselves, 32k. And then once we get to their health, we're going to see 55k. So we are getting like cut in half on their shields, but because they don't actually have any damage reduction besides that, we're just cutting through their shields anyway with raw damage. Against armor, that's not a thing. If we went to like a Lancer's armor on the wiki and went to like level 100, 120, you're talking about 90+% damage reduction. These guys have 0%. So they're taking 10 times more damage than a Lancer would before you take into account the multiplier. So I hope that has sort of enlightened you guys as to why the damage type of this skill is probably really bad and why I don't like it and why currently I don't actually have any builds utilizing this. And let's talk about the Augment, because not only is this skill generally bad for Vauban, it's a horde killer because it's not great at killing your priority targets. It's meant to be, right now with its design, a horde killer. You're just killing a lot of things with one throw. And it's just that's just weaker than all of Vauban's other stuff. Tesla Bank is stronger than it, especially since they're both affected by armor. Tesla Bank is way stronger than it to begin with. On top of that, if you throw that on top of Vortex being insanely good at mobbing, Bastille being insanely good at mobbing, you're talking about essentially introducing a horde useful tool that's just worse than all of his other ones he already had. So looking into the orbital strike and what you would kind of do with its augment. Photon Repeater. So Photon Repeater, if you strike at least 5 enemies, the next cast will cost no energy. That kind of incites us to either spam throw or to tank our efficiency. So we can run Blind Rage, for instance. The problem with both of these is that we're dealing blast damage and we're ragdolling enemies everywhere. You've already seen this before. We're ragdolling enemies all over the place. It's just not conducive to Photon Repeater. Not only that, but this skill doesn't scale with duration. So some of you might know where I'm going with this. If we take Fleeting Expertise, we lose duration. Usually that's a terrible thing in a warframe. Like, duration is usually super important. On this skill it's not. So just straight up replacing that and getting a bunch of efficiency is way better than going Photon Repeater. Granted, we can't go Blind Rage into it as well. You can get rid of Streamline and it just frees up a lot. So you can run Fleeting Expertise, you can come out, and with 320 energy, I can spam. Like, This is way better than having to wait for 5 enemies to group up constantly. So the design of this augment by default, just because of the way the skill works, is worse than fleeting expertise. Granted, you're not going to be able to have blind rage, but the fact that we're going to be able to spam cast 3 times in the same amount of energy, or 4 times maybe even, and God forbid you're running the augment and you miss 5 enemies, because then you're losing 25% of your mana every throw. And on Vauban, mana is life, because we're a quick thinking build usually, right? So just know that duration is really not important. So you can run fleeting expertise and transient fortitude with zero fear. Zero fear. You don't care. It'll be completely fine with this build, and then you can run some other strength things if you would like to. Energy conversion is not going to work well with this because we're going to be spamming, so you're probably going to want to run intensify or umbral intensify if you can swing the extra cost there. But you definitely want more range in this, so this is sort of the part of the video where we're trying to make it work. So if I take that, let me go ahead and put in quick thinking and adaptation, because I know we're taking those, or at least I do. You can do whatever you want, obviously. So from there, we probably would take corrosive projection if we were against Grenier. If we weren't against Grenier, you can kind of take your pick. Energy siphon's not bad. Definitely not power donation. You can take some other stuff for weapons. There's a lot that you can kind of take here. You can do enemy radar. I know some people like taking that instead of running like a sentinel or something, running it on their sentinel. But I would probably just say stick with energy siphon. And then from there, you kind of can pick whatever, but I would say range is definitely going to be your go-to here. And then I believe you can run, I already had it up, cunning. So that's probably what your build's going to look like. Now you're probably going to have some of these things maxed out where I don't. But yeah, you're going to have around 200% strength. You're going to have around 200% range, and you're going to be able to spam. So this is what it would sort of end up looking like. And you can kind of throw it above them too. You can kind of just go ham. And granted, you're not going to do it that hard in an actual mission, but yeah, that's sort of the sentiment of the skill. And the augment would just straight up make this build worse. Finally, the last thing that I sort of want to cover, and hopefully I've covered everything. If I've missed anything, like always, guys, tell me. Like, I want to know, like, if there is a way to make this crit, or a way to make it ignore armor, or, you know, some of these things, but I think most of it is intrinsic. To add sort of insult to injury, I don't know how much you guys have played around with Railjack, but the Railjack, one of the skill trees that you can actually get, let me see if I can look at it in here. I think I have to go to profile to actually see it, so I don't think I can. But anyway, the Railjack allows you to use a Warframe ability. So every Warframe gets an ability they can use in the Railjack as sort of like a support ability, and it costs like a certain amount of resources from Railjack. The ability they chose for Vauban is Photon Strike. And you can't see it, but my hand is on my face right now because it agitates me. So what it makes me feel like is, because they're so close together, Railjack and the Vauban, is that they literally wanted someone to have an orbital strike for the Railjack, and they were reworking Vauban. So they're like, we'll throw it on there. That makes sense. He can throw grenades, and that could be a beacon, and that could call down an orbital strike. So I feel like the skill kind of got tacked on just because of Railjack at this point, and I could be completely wrong about that, but it definitely makes me think that that is what happened. In any case, I don't mean to be such a downer, but like I said, I wasn't really looking forward to making this video. I'm not gonna have any builds using this personally. I don't like the skill. I don't like its weaknesses, and I think it needs some quality of life for sure. Its AoE is too small. It explodes mid-air, so you can't really like throw it far. It costs quite a bit of energy for the limitations it has, and we don't really need another hoarding tool on Vauban. We need something to actually deal consistent, reliable damage, and this is not it. So, in any case, guys, I'm sorry to be such a downer, but again, like I said before, if you guys have seen something that would maybe make me change my opinion on this, let me know. But thanks for watching.